Picture this. You're living your best life in a crystal city floating above a gas giant, spending your days creating art and discussing philosophy with your neighbors. You've never seen war, never needed to fight for anything, never even imagined that something truly evil could exist in the universe. That was a Kithera, 3,000 years of peace, 12 billion souls living in harmony. Let me paint you a better picture of what their world was like. Imagine waking up every morning to the sight of swirling purple and gold clouds beneath your feet, stretching out for thousands of miles in every direction. The Kithera had built their cities afloat in the upper atmosphere of gas giants, where the pressure was just right and the view was absolutely breathtaking. Their buildings weren't just structures. They were living art pieces made from crystalline materials that sang in harmonious tones when the solar winds hit them just right. These people had turned daily life into an art form. They spent their mornings tending to gardens that grew in zero gravity, creating sculptures that defied physics, and writing poetry that could make you cry just from the beauty of it. In the afternoons, they'd gather in great floating amphitheaters to debate the meaning of existence, share stories from their dreams, or listen to music that used frequencies most species couldn't even hear. They had no military, no weapons, no concept of violence beyond the theoretical. Why would they need any of that? For 3 millennia, the Kithera had lived in a bubble of perfect peace. The most serious conflict they'd had in recent memory was a heated debate about whether sunset colors should be arranged in ascending or descending order of beauty. Their idea of a crisis was when their favorite artist decided to take a century-long creative break. Their technology was advanced, sure, but it was all focused on making life more beautiful, more meaningful, more harmonious. They had defensive systems, but they were designed to handle natural disasters like solar flares or asteroid impacts. The idea that someone might actually want to hurt them, to destroy them, to consume them, it was so far outside their understanding that they didn't even have words for it in their language. Then the Devourers showed up, and everything changed in a matter of hours. These weren't your typical alien invaders looking for resources or territory. No, these were something far worse, a swarm of chitinous nightmares that literally ate entire worlds and left nothing behind but empty shells. Picture the worst horror movie you've ever seen, multiply it by 1,000, and you might get close to what the Devourers actually were. They moved like a living storm across star systems, billions upon billions of creatures the size of small buildings, each one designed by evolution or engineering to do one thing perfectly: consume everything in their path. They didn't want to conquer the Kithera worlds. They wanted to eat them completely and utterly, leaving nothing behind but cosmic dust. The Kithera's beautiful defenses? Gone in days. Their elegant cities that had floated serenely for millennia? Consumed like snacks at a movie theater. The crystalline structures that had sung for thousands of years fell silent one by one as the swarm devoured them, turning art into nothing more than raw materials for their endless hunger. What made it even more terrifying was how efficiently they worked. This wasn't random destruction. It was systematic, methodical, almost businesslike in its thoroughness. The Devourers had clearly done this before many times. They knew exactly how to dismantle a civilization, how to process a planet, how to leave absolutely nothing behind that could ever grow, or build, or create again. The Kithera tried everything they could think of. They activated every defensive system they had, called upon every bit of technology at their disposal, even attempted to communicate with the creatures to understand what they wanted. Nothing worked. The swarm didn't want to negotiate, didn't care about surrender, didn't even seem to notice the Kithera as anything more than slightly organized food. In their final moments, as their last cities fell and their population dropped from billions to millions to thousands, they did what any desperate civilization would do. They screamed into the void. Using every quantum transmitter they had left, they sent messages across the galaxy, desperate pleas for help broadcast on every frequency they could manage. This is the Kithera Collective. Their final transmission began. We are 12 billion souls facing extinction. We have lived in peace for 3,000 years. We have never harmed anyone. We create only beauty. Please, if anyone can hear this, if anyone cares about justice in this universe, help us. Don't let our art, our culture, our people disappear forever. Most species got those messages, decoded them, analyzed the threat, took one look at what the Devourers were capable of and decided their own borders needed strengthening instead. After all, why risk everything to save strangers when you could barely protect yourself? But sometimes the universe has other plans. But those desperate signals kept traveling, bouncing through subspace for months until they reached a little spiral arm where an unremarkable yellow star hosted a blue and green world. The beings there, well, they'd been listening to alien chatter for decades, though they rarely bothered responding. Let me tell you about that blue and green world and the creatures living on it. From space, Earth looked pretty ordinary, just another rocky planet with some water and a thin atmosphere. Nothing special compared to gas giant cities of the Kythera or the crystal formations found on a dozen other worlds. But appearances can be deceiving, and the beings who called this little planet home were anything but ordinary. The humans have been quietly monitoring deep space communications for over 50 years, ever since they'd first figured out how to build receivers sensitive enough to pick up alien transmissions. They had entire facilities hidden in remote locations, underground bunkers in the Nevada desert, research stations buried beneath Antarctic ice, floating platforms anchored in the deepest parts of the Pacific Ocean. These weren't your typical radio telescopes listening for simple signals. These were quantum communication arrays capable of intercepting and decoding messages sent across thousands of light years. Most of the time, the intercepted alien chatter was pretty boring stuff. Trade negotiations between merchant species, scientific data exchanges, diplomatic messages about border disputes over mining rights. The humans cataloged it all, studied the languages, mapped the civilizations, but they kept to themselves. They'd learned early on that announcing your presence to the galaxy was usually a bad idea. Better to watch and learn from the shadows. The night shift crew at Facility 7 had been monitoring routine transmissions when something different came through. The quantum receiver arrays suddenly lit up with activity unlike anything they'd seen before. The signal was strong, desperate, and broadcast on every frequency simultaneously. Whatever was sending it was putting everything they had into making sure someone, anyone, would hear them. When their computers finally translated that last Kythera transmission, something interesting happened. The technicians running the facility that night would later describe feeling a strange sensation, like the air itself was holding its breath. Every screen in the building flickered simultaneously. Every quantum receiver registered the same impossible reading. Even the coffee makers stopped working for exactly 37 seconds. But that wasn't the weird part. The weird part was what happened next. The universe itself seemed to take notice. You see, reality has rules written into its very fabric by civilizations, so old they'd basically become cosmic forces. We're talking about species that existed billions of years ago, back when the galaxy was young and wild and full of possibilities. These ancient beings had long since evolved beyond physical form. But before they ascended to whatever higher plane of existence they now occupied, they'd embedded certain protocols into fundamental structure of space-time itself. Think of them as cosmic emergency procedures, built-in responses to specific situations that the universe would automatically trigger when certain conditions were met. And one of those rules was simple. When innocents face extinction purely because they're too peaceful to defend themselves, the cosmos provides an answer. The Kythera's final transmission contains something that the ancient protocols recognize immediately, the mathematical signature of absolute innocence under threat. These weren't warriors who'd been defeated in battle. These weren't conquerors getting their comeuppance. These were artists and philosophers and dreamers who'd never hurt anyone in their entire 3,000-year history, and they were about to be wiped out by something that was basically a cosmic plague. Ancient protocols activated across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Probability waves that had been randomly fluctuating suddenly collapsed into focused patterns. Quantum mechanics stopped being random and started being purposeful. The laws of physics themselves began to bend in ways that shouldn't have been possible. On Earth, every human military installation on the planet received the same message at exactly the same time, despite being on completely different communication networks. Command centers in Washington, Moscow, Beijing, London, New Delhi, all of them lit up with identical priority alerts that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The message was simple. Response authorized. Corridors opening. prepare for immediate deployment. Nobody knew who had sent the authorization. Nobody could trace where it came from. But every single person who read those words felt something deep in their bones, some instinct older than civilization, older than language, older than conscious thought. They knew, without being told, that somewhere in the galaxy innocent people were dying, and somehow, impossibly, they'd been chosen to do something about it. Across thousands of light years, space itself began to bend and fold, opening corridors that shouldn't exist according to any known physics. Reality was rewriting itself to create a path between Earth and the Kithira worlds, a tunnel through dimensions that would allow for instantaneous travel across impossible distances. The stars had heard the cry, and they were sending their response. What they were sending was humanity, and humanity had been waiting their entire evolutionary history for exactly this moment. When the human fleet dropped out of fold space, it was like watching demons tear through the fabric of reality itself. Admiral Kate Morrison's flagship, the Iron Resolve, led a formation of ships that looked like they'd been forged in the fires of a dozen wars, because they had been. Picture the moment when everything changed for the Kithira survivors. They'd been huddled in their emergency shelters for weeks, watching helplessly as a devourer swarm consumed everything they'd ever known. Their beautiful floating cities were gone, their art collections destroyed, their people scattered across a handful of hidden refuges. They'd sent their desperate message into the void and received nothing but silence in return. Hope was a luxury they could no longer afford. Then space itself seemed to tear open like someone ripping a hole in a giant piece of fabric. The first thing that emerged wasn't a ship. It was something that looked more like a controlled explosion. Brilliant flashes of energy cascaded across multiple dimensions as the fold space corridor stabilized, creating patterns of light that the Kithira's instruments couldn't even properly register. Their monitoring equipment, designed to track the gentle movements of artistic space vessels, suddenly found itself trying to process energy readings that maxed out every sensor they had. What came through that impossible doorway defied everything the Kithira thought they knew about spacecraft design. Human ships looked like they'd been built by someone who understood that space was a hostile environment full of things that wanted to kill you. Where Kithira vessels were smooth and graceful, flowing like musical notes made solid, human ships were angular and aggressive, covered in armor plating that bore the scars of actual combat. The Iron Resolve itself was a massive dreadnought that measured nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern. Its hull was a matte black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, broken only by the blue glow of energy conduits running along its surface like veins carrying liquid lightning. Weapon emplacements dotted every available surface, not decorative ceremonial pieces like the Kithira used, but clearly functional systems designed for one purpose only. Behind the flagship came dozens of other vessels, each one different but all sharing that same aggressive, battle-tested appearance. Cruisers with hulls scarred by energy weapons, destroyers that looked like they'd been designed specifically to hunt down and eliminate threats. Frigates so heavily armed they carried more firepower than most species use to defend entire star systems. The surviving Kithira monitoring stations couldn't make sense of what they were seeing. Their instruments registered energy signatures that broke their understanding of physics. The humans were using power sources that seemed to generate more energy than they consumed, propulsion systems that moved through space without any visible means of thrust, and shield technologies that bent reality around the ships like protective bubbles of altered physics. But the weapon systems, those were the truly terrifying part. Every human ship bristled with armaments that seemed to bend the laws of matter and antimatter. Energy cannons that could apparently focus stellar-level power into beam widths measured in millimeters. Missile systems that carried warheads, using principles the Kithira couldn't identify. And stranger things, devices that seemed to manipulate gravitational fields, systems that appeared to work by convincing reality that certain physical laws didn't apply. What disturbed the Kithira observers most weren't the weapons themselves, but the bio readings coming from inside those ships. The gentle, artistic Kithira had spent 3,000 years developing technology that could sense the emotional states of other beings. It helped them create more beautiful, more harmonious environments. That same technology was now picking up something they'd never encountered before in any sapient species. The humans aboard those vessels radiated predatory satisfaction, not bloodthirsty rage or mindless aggression. This was something far more calculated and professional. These beings were genuinely pleased to be here, excited about the job they were about to do. The Kythera sensors detected elevated heart rates that indicated anticipation rather than fear, brain activity patterns that suggested focused concentration, mixed with what could only be described as enthusiasm for combat. It was like discovering that somewhere in the universe, evolution had produced a species that found warfare not just necessary, but genuinely enjoyable. Admiral Morrison's communication array activated, cutting through the quantum interference that had been jamming Kythera communications for weeks. Her message reached every surviving command post simultaneously, broadcast with power and clarity that made it impossible to ignore. This is Admiral Kate Morrison of the Earth Defense Forces. Her voice carried an accent the Kythera computers couldn't place, but the tone was unmistakable, calm, professional, and absolutely confident. We received your distress call. We're here to eliminate everything that's trying to eliminate you. I need all Kythera personnel to stay in your shelters and keep out of our way while we work. This won't take long. The transmission cut off, leaving the Kythera survivors staring at their instruments in amazement. Someone had actually come to help them. But as they watched the human fleet begin to move toward the devourer positions with the fluid precision of predators who'd found their prey, they began to wonder if they called for rescue or accidentally summoned something even more dangerous than what they were already facing. The humans had arrived, and they looked very, very good at what they did. What happened next wasn't really a battle. It was pest control performed by experts. Let me explain what made this so different from every other encounter the Devourers had experienced. For the past several decades, these creatures have been moving to the galaxy like a cosmic lawnmower, consuming everything in their path with methodical efficiency. They perfected a simple but effective strategy: arrive in overwhelming numbers, spread across multiple planets simultaneously, and devour everything before the local species could mount any meaningful resistance. The Devourers had steamrolled 17 civilizations without breaking a sweat. The artistic Villani had tried to negotiate with them through interpretive dance. The highly logical Zorth had attempted to find a mathematical solution that would satisfy both parties. The spiritually advanced Namari had offered to share their enlightenment with the Swarm. Every single approach had failed because these civilizations were trying to solve the Devourer problem the same way they solved every other problem: through cooperation, understanding, and peaceful resolution. They'd never faced anything that fought back with real skill and genuine enthusiasm for violence. When the human fleet engaged the Devourer swarm, it became immediately clear that this was going to be a very different kind of encounter. The humans didn't try to communicate with the creatures. They didn't attempt to understand their motivations or find a diplomatic solution. They took one look at the situation, identified the Devourers as a threat that needed to be eliminated, and got to work with the kind of professional efficiency that only comes from millions of years of evolutionary experience. Captain Tom Bradley, commanding the heavy cruiser Relentless, demonstrated something that no previous civilization had even considered possible. Instead of trying to fight the Devourers ship-to-ship in traditional space combat, he used the system's own geology as ammunition. Using precisely calculated gravitational manipulations, he knocked 3 small moons out of their orbits and sent them screaming toward the largest concentration of Devourer vessels at velocities that turned each moon into a kinetic weapon of unimaginable destructive power. The Kythera observers watched in amazement as Bradley's team performed the calculations in real time, adjusting for gravitational interference, predicting Devourer movement patterns, and timing the impacts with mathematical precision. What would have taken the Kythera months of careful planning and artistic consideration, the humans accomplished in under 6 hours. And they did while simultaneously coordinating with dozens of other ships executing their own independent operations. Commander Lisa Hayes took a completely different approach that demonstrated just how differently humans thought about warfare. While other species had tried to fight the Devourers with conventional weapons, Hayes had studied their biology and found a weakness that no one else had even looked for. Her ship carried specialized bioweapon deployment systems that could analyze enemy genetic structures in real time and then deploy custom-designed viruses that would rewrite Devourer DNA on a molecular level. What made this particularly effective was the speed at which Hayes operated. Within hours of the first encounter, her team had isolated the genetic sequences that controlled Devourer reproduction, navigation, and hive mind communication. They then deployed targeted biological agents that turned the swarm's own rapid reproduction cycle against them, causing the creatures to literally evolve themselves out of existence in accelerated time frames. The Kythera had never seen anything like it. While they'd spent centuries studying the beauty of natural evolution, the humans had weaponized it. Major Dave Collins coordinated what would become known as the most brutally efficient tactical maneuver in recorded galactic history. Using a combination of fold space technology and predictive algorithms, Collins executed flanking maneuvers that caught the Devourers completely off guard. His squadron would appear behind enemy formations, eliminate key vessels with surgical precision, and then disappear before the swarm could respond. What made Collins' tactics so devastating wasn't just their effectiveness. It was a psychological impact on the remaining Devourers. For the first time in their existence, these creatures found themselves being hunted by something more skilled at predation than they were. Collins eliminated 3/4 of the swarm in the first week, not through overwhelming firepower, but through superior tactical thinking and perfect execution. These humans fought like they'd been born for this, because they had been. Here's what the other galactic civilizations hadn't understood about humanity. They were the product of a very specific evolutionary environment. Earth hadn't been a peaceful world where species evolved through cooperation and mutual benefit. It had been a competitive hellscape where survival meant being better at violence than everything else that wanted to eat you. Every single human carried the genetic legacy of millions of years of survivors. Their ancestors had faced ice ages, volcanic eruptions, meteor impacts, and thousands of other species that were bigger, stronger, faster, or more venomous. Humanity had survived by developing the one trait that made them more dangerous than anything else on their planet: the ability to think strategically about violence. They'd spent their entire evolutionary history perfecting the art of war, not because they were evil, but because their world had demanded it. Every human instinct, every reflexive response, every pattern of thought had been shaped by millions of years of ancestors who'd faced impossible odds and won through superior tactics, better planning, and absolute determination to survive. The Devourers had never encountered anything like this before. They'd always been the apex predator, the ultimate threat, the unstoppable force. Suddenly, they found themselves facing beings who looked at their swarm tactics and saw obvious weaknesses, who analyzed their biology and found exploitable vulnerabilities, who treated their overwhelming numbers as a logistics problem with an elegant solution. For the first time in their existence, the Devourers were experiencing what it felt like to be prey. When the last Devourer hive ship died screaming in the void, the human fleet began withdrawing as suddenly as they'd appeared. The Kythera, emerging from their shelters to find their world somehow still intact, discovered gifts left behind: medical supplies, reconstruction blueprints, and defense platforms that would ensure nothing like this could happen again. But let me tell you about those final moments, because what happened next would change how the entire galaxy thought about warfare, protection, and the nature of strength itself. The end came faster than anyone expected. After weeks of systematic elimination, the Devourer swarm had been reduced to a single massive hive ship, desperately trying to escape the system with what remained of their forces. This wasn't just any vessel. It was their command center, their queen ship, the biological and technological heart of the entire swarm. For 3 days, it had been running, using every trick and tactic the Devourers had learned over millennia of conquest. The humans could have destroyed it in minutes. Their weapons were more than capable of punching through its defenses and ending the threat immediately. Instead, they did something that puzzled the Kythera observers. They herded it. Like skilled hunters driving prey toward a specific location, the human fleet systematically cut off every escape route, forcing the hive ship deeper into the system until it had nowhere left to run. When the final engagement came, it lasted exactly 17 minutes. The human fleet surrounded the hive ship in a perfect sphere, every weapon trained on their target, every escape route sealed. Admiral Morrison's voice cut through the quantum static one last time. This is for everyone you consumed. This is for all the civilizations that couldn't fight back. This is so you never hurt anyone again. What followed wasn't brutality, it was precision. The humans dismantled the hive ship piece by piece, systematically destroying its ability to reproduce, to communicate, to spread its plague across the galaxy. When it finally fell silent, the threat that had terrorized 17 civilizations was over. Then something remarkable happened. Instead of celebrating their victory or claiming the system for themselves, the human fleet immediately began withdrawal procedures. Within hours of the last Devourer's destruction, human ships were powering down their weapons, reconfiguring their systems, and preparing to leave as suddenly as they'd arrived. The Kythera survivors, cautiously emerging from their emergency shelters, found their worlds transformed but not conquered. The humans hadn't taken anything. They hadn't planted flags or established bases or demanded tribute. Instead, they left gifts. Medical supply stations appeared in orbit around every Kythera world, containing healing technologies the survivors had never seen before. These weren't just basic first aid supplies. They were advanced medical systems capable of treating injuries and illnesses that Kythera science couldn't even diagnose. Trauma care designed for beings who'd survived planetary-scale disasters. Psychological support systems for entire populations dealing with the aftermath of near extinction. More impressive were the reconstruction blueprints. The humans had somehow analyzed Kythera architecture during the battle and created detailed plans for rebuilding their cities, but better, stronger, more beautiful than before, but also more defensible. The designs incorporated lessons learned from the Devourer attack while maintaining the artistic vision that made Kythera culture unique. But the most significant gifts were the defense platforms, automated systems that would orbit each world permanently, watching for threats that the peaceful Kythera might not even recognize until it was too late. These weren't just weapons. They were complete early warning networks, equipped with quantum communicators that could alert other civilizations if danger appeared. The Kythera tried to thank their rescuers, to establish diplomatic contact, to offer some form of payment for their salvation. They received a single response from Admiral Morrison. Payment isn't necessary. Protecting those who can't protect themselves isn't a transaction. It's a responsibility. Take care of yourselves. We'll be watching. But they also found something else that would have far greater impact than any gift: monitoring beacons. Silent guardians hidden throughout the system, watching and listening. Not spying devices, but protective systems that would alert the humans if the Kythera ever faced another existential threat. Word of what happened spread through quantum space like wildfire. Within weeks, every civilization in the galaxy had heard the story. The peaceful Kythera, facing extinction from an unstoppable force, had been saved by mysterious beings from the Outer Rim who treated the Devourer swarm like a routine pest control problem. The galaxy learned something new that day. Somewhere in the Outer Rim lived a species so thoroughly engineered for violence that they considered the Devourer swarm the nightmare that had consumed 17 civilizations, a minor annoyance. But more importantly, they learned that these beings used their terrible skills not for conquest or domination, but for protection. Other peaceful civilizations began to sleep a little easier, knowing that when darkness came calling, someone would answer. The gentle Villani started including prayers of gratitude for the guardians from the distant stars in their evening meditations. The logical Zorth updated their probability calculations to include the variable of human intervention in their long-term survival equations. Trade routes that had been abandoned due to Devourer threats reopened. Exploration missions that had been canceled were reinstated. Art festivals and cultural exchanges that had been postponed indefinitely began planning again. The stars had indeed answered the Kythera's cry. What they'd sent was proof that sometimes the monsters you need are the ones who choose to protect instead of destroy. And somewhere out there, in an unremarkable solar system around a yellow star, humanity was already preparing for the next time someone would need their help, because they would be listening, and when the call came, they would answer.